Welcome to Assessment in Focus, the podcast where we invite guests to tell us the real stories of digital assessment transformation, innovation and enhancement. Flexible assessment with integrity is a shared goal between higher education and Inspira, so we're here to discover how institutions around the world are assessing today and beyond. I'm your host, Ishan Kolhatkar, Global Client Evangelist at Inspira, and today I'm delighted to be joined by Dale Hansen from the University of Queensland. Dale is a learning designer at UQ in Australia, specialising in assessment transformation. He has a career in higher education spanning 20 years with roles in teaching, design and development of courses, learning activities and assessments, and piloting the rollout of a range of assessment technologies, including Inspira. Dale, thank you very much for being on the podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's good to be here on the first season.
Dale, I have had the pleasure of going to the UQ campus in St Lucia, just outside, in Brisbane. I'm not sure I know my geography that well of Australia, but in Brisbane. It's a beautiful place. I'm sure many of our listeners are aware of UQ, but for any who aren't, maybe you could give us just a little portrait of the institution.
Yes, well, UQ has been around for a long time. It opened in 1910. In the scheme of things, I know there are much older universities in the world, but in terms of Australian universities, it is one of the older universities, and it is a very big university. The St Lucia campus where I work is very sprawling, and it's got a lot of those beautiful sandstone buildings, and we cover a whole range of disciplines at UQ. Most of the ones you'd expect to find at universities, and also some that are a little bit more niche. For example, we have another campus out at Gatton, which is to the west, and out there they do veterinary science. And it's one of the few universities in Australia that actually does vet science. But yes, it is a beautiful place.
I was going to say, when I was at UQ, I met a professor who was telling me all about, and I want to say crocodiles, but I might mean alligators because I don't know my animals too well. But yeah, I was hearing about the sorts of things that you'd expect in the sort of more rural parts of Australia. So it was fascinating to see different disciplines and subjects that people knew about. Dale, this is a really exciting time to be in education. And I think that's probably true of all education through history. But there are lots of new emerging technologies coinciding with well-proven ways of teaching, learning and assessment. And the intersection of those two provides higher education institutions around the world with so many opportunities. And I wanted to get into that straight away and ask you, as higher education evolves, what do you see as the most critical changes needed in assessment practices to better align with the skills students need in the future?
Well, when we're talking about skills for the future, there are two things that come to mind for me in our current context. Firstly, there are AI tools that are already being used in many industries. So our students need to be able to graduate with a knowledge of not only how to use those tools, but when it is appropriate to use those tools, because it's not always appropriate to use them for various reasons, like ethical reasons and privacy reasons and sharing of intellectual property and so forth. So educators are going to need to work out ways of incorporating AI into their teaching so as to teach students the responsible use of AI in their discipline, setting good examples so that students can then discern when it's appropriate to use AI. But the other side of the coin there is that there are still things that students need to know without referring to AI, because there are going to be times during their careers when they need to think on their feet and not have the luxury of technology by their side to help them. So in response to that question about skills students need for the future, it's also just those core skills that they should have in their discipline, independent of any technology assistance that they might get from AI. So how do we change our assessment practices to accommodate this, I guess, this tension between knowing how to use AI and when it's appropriate, and also times when it's not appropriate and when they shouldn't be using it. For those critical skills that they need to know, we need assessments that students complete without AI, and we need to be able to verify that the students are drawing upon their own knowledge and skills when they're completing those assessments and they're not referring to other materials. And trying to balance this with other assessment concepts like authentic assessment and universal design for learning can be challenging, because our options can become a bit limited when we want to ensure students aren't using technology. So invigilated exams are one path that people take. Supervised practical assessments are another. Viva voce, sort of oral assessment without a pre-written script is another. But some of these aren't always practical or scalable when you have large class sizes. So these are some of the challenges we're grappling with now in this current environment with these technologies.
That large class size point is particularly important. It was only when I started working here and then went out to Australia for the first time a couple of years ago that I really realised the scale of Australian universities. You are a smaller number of universities, but much, much bigger, so with very large class sizes. And that's true in other institutions around the world. But yeah, that practical element of whether you can or not is important. But I wanted to pick up actually on something else that you mentioned, which was the giving people the skills that they need regardless of the technology. Because it's true that we all need to know how to research things and apply the knowledge we find. The technology that we've used might have moved from being a book to being something that's digital, but the skill hasn't changed, has it?
No, not really. Yeah, it's still very much the same thing. And I think when we introduce AI into that, it's kind of like a sort of, it's like Google on steroids kind of thing, where you can ask a question and be given information straight away without even having to sift through the results that you might have had to do in the past. And the challenge then is discerning what's a reliable source, and this has been a challenge for a long time really, is we need students to know what's an actual reliable source and what's perhaps not a reliable source. And if AI is giving them results much more quickly and easily than they would have got in the past, then they still need to go back to those original sources and verify them, ensure that the information is valid.
Universities aren't necessarily transforming digitally for the first time. Depending on where you are in the world, this digital transformation either is one long continuum or there have been various points in it. But regardless of whether people are transitioning from pen and paper or whether they're further enhancing what they're doing digitally, what, in your experience, has been the most significant barrier, or maybe a couple, to that transformation process, and how are institutions able to overcome it? So some of your experiences here would be great to share with the world.
Yeah, well, I've been working in digital transformation for a number of years now, so I've seen these different waves of things coming along that we have to sort of deal with. And the main barrier that I've found is a lack of time. So academics are time poor. They have a teaching load, they have a marking load. There's the need for them to update their teaching materials regularly so they remain current. And when they update those teaching materials, they have to update their assessment. And then there's ad hoc discussions they have with students and consultation times that they might have, administrative tasks, and usually they've got a research load as well. So with all of that already taking up a lot of their time, having to then adapt materials or whatever it is for a digital platform or the new wave of technology is not always seen as a high priority. And that's completely understandable given that workload that I just mentioned. So how have I dealt with this? Well, how do we, I guess, everyone to deal with this. First of all, we need digital platforms that are easy and intuitive to use, so they don't have to invest a lot of time in learning how to use them. But yeah, one of the strategies that I've employed in my time in digital transformation is to make it as easy as possible for them to take that first step. So as a learning designer, my job is to help academics. So helping them take that first step in transforming their assessment by actually just reviewing their existing assessment for them and trying wherever possible to do that asynchronously. So there's no need for us to have lengthy meetings. I can just review that assessment and then provide them with a written list of recommendations as to how it could be transformed, and even then accompanying that list with some actual mock-ups in the platform to show them how it can be done, how it works, and they can pick those up and actually use them straight away. The other barrier that I have seen is just a general hesitancy to try something different. And sometimes this is due to a person having done something a certain way for such a long time, and they're satisfied with their approach and they don't see a need to change that. And sometimes they don't want to change because they're experiencing change fatigue. There's been too many changes taking place in recent years, and they just don't want to have to make yet another change, especially if they don't have the reassurance that the change is going to be lasting. For example, if we don't have a long-term commitment to using a particular tool or platform, then people are concerned that if they invest the time in moving to that tool or platform, it may amount to nothing if the tool or platform ceases to exist or it's not funded in a few years. So some ways that I have tried to help people who are hesitant to change, well, sometimes there are mandates in place and they don't really have much of a choice, but in my role, I can't force people to change. So what I try to do is to help them see the benefits of changing. For example, if they're getting their students to do an exam using pen and paper, and that exam mostly consists of questions that have short, definitive answers, then they're going to spend a lot of time marking a paper-based assessment that could probably be done automatically, could be automatically marked in an instant using a digital platform. So while there is an investment in time up front in getting that assessment onto that platform, they're going to save much more time later on when it comes to marking, because that's going to be done automatically for them.
And I think it's that, well, there's two things here. I think number one, this is going to resonate with anyone listening who works in education in any role, because these are such common issues. And I think there's nothing wrong with that at all. It's actually good for us to realize that a number of the issues that we face are common, no matter where we work. The context is the same. But I wholly agree with you that the showing people that why change, what the benefit is to them, the value is to them, is so crucially important to getting their buy-in to it. I was still working at a university when COVID hit, and there was obviously the why change. There was, we had no choice, but it was still a requirement to show people why we're doing it this way. We couldn't lose sight of that, because people would still rightly say, okay, but is there a different way of doing this? Is there a better way of doing this? So thank you for sharing these, because I as I say, I really want people to hear them and appreciate that these are similar problems. But as you've identified, that there are ways to make that journey easier. It's impossible to have a podcast, I was going to say in education, but probably on anything at the moment, without mentioning AI. And my question is loaded at the start, but the second part I think is probably the more interesting bit, which is, do you think the rise of digital tools and AI has changed how we define academic integrity and ensure academic integrity? And I think most people are going to say yes to that, but you might say no, I don't know. But the bit I'm more interested in is, how do institutions deal with this? What should be the plan? And I preface this by saying that anyone listening, if you've not seen UQ's plans on AI and the I don't want to steal all of your answer, Dale, but the work that's been done at UQ to very much define this, please go read them. And in fact, this is something that I think is a great blueprint. But over to you. How do we deal with this?
Yes, so in answer to that first part of the question, do I think that AI has changed how we define and ensure academic integrity. I'm also in the yes camp there. So while there are tools available that can attempt to detect AI use, we can't be sure that they are 100% accurate, because there are so many different AI tools that produce responses in different ways, and in many cases they're very convincing. And even if those tools tell us they've detected AI, we still can't be sure, because it may just be the case that it's actually legitimate student work that just happens to be written in a way that's similar to what AI would produce. So we're kind of at a point where we were many years ago, before we even had text matching tools, and students would complete written submissions using pen and paper, or perhaps a typewriter, and they'd just submit that on paper, and we'd have no way of knowing whether they consulted books or copied text verbatim from those books or other sources. We just didn't have the means of checking possible sources en masse like we do now. So we just had to trust that they'd done the right thing. And unlike text matching tools, which can show a clear link between what a student has submitted and actual matched source material, there's really not a direct match to be made between what a student has submitted and what AI might have produced, because the output of AI is unique every time it's prompted. So with this in mind, there are certain assessment types that we can't be sure students have written themselves, like long-form essays, that students might be given a 3-week window to write. So that's a big window of opportunity there to consult AI in that process. So part of the solution here is that, where appropriate, we need to transform assessment to an AI resilient form of assessment. But we also need to foster a culture of trust within our classrooms. We've got to remember that higher education is an adult education environment. It's not like school, where you have this adult-child relationship. There needs to be a level of trust that comes with that relationship, and we can further foster that trust by being transparent with our students about the expectations around assessment. For example, if we were to go ahead and reduce a complete blanket ban of AI at the university, that's sending a message to our students that we don't trust them. However, if we allow AI use in certain assessments and clearly indicate why we're allowing it, for example, they need to be able to use AI in their profession when they graduate, so we're letting you use AI in this assessment, then we're sending a message to them that, yes, we do trust you to use AI appropriately in this instance. That then makes it more palatable for us to then say, however, on this other assessment, we're not going to allow AI, and here are the reasons why. And you give them the good reasons, like I mentioned earlier, they need to have this knowledge and these skills in their profession without consulting AI. So once we pivot to a point where we're making conscious decisions around the use of AI in certain assessments and the non-use of AI in other assessments, and being upfront with our students as to the rationale around those decisions, then we ideally find ourselves in a place where academics are no longer spending so much of their time policing students' work, and perhaps can go back to spending more time actually teaching and mentoring their students and helping them on their learning journey.
Which is definitely what they want to do. And again, the parallels in so many other aspects of teaching, learning, and assessment are there. The AI has caused a disruption in the same way that other technologies have, and I appreciate the magnitude is almost certainly higher. But looking at those first principles of how we interact with our students, the trust we repose in them, the information we give them, how important that is. Yeah, I think that's going to certainly resonate with people around the world. And as you said, the UQ I think were one of the initial wave of universities to really start to define this is where AI is appropriate, this is where it isn't. Or certainly one of the first ones I read about. You guys did a very good job about talking about what you were doing, and I think that's also given confidence to other institutions to really get out a bit more and be able to talk about it. The question I've been asking everyone, or I am asking everyone this year, and it's going to end in a white paper towards the end of the year, is about the future of assessment. What do you see as the future of assessment, and what role, if any, do you see digital tools playing in that future of assessment?
Well, the future of assessment, that's a big question. So I think that some of it comes down to what I've discussed already, where AI is going to be incorporated into some assessments, and we're going to allow AI in some assessments, and other assessments we're not going to be allowing AI in. But I also see AI being used as a collaborative tool in the development in the development of students' work, really. In that, one of the things that I've noticed over the years is that the provision of feedback has always been a challenge, and just like I mentioned earlier, people don't have a lot of time to be able to provide customized feedback to people, and draft submissions are not very common. It's not very common that people would have time to mark a draft and provide feedback on a draft. And it's not even about the feedback on the end product, it's also about the feedback that happens during the process of producing a piece of work. So I think that there are opportunities then for AI to play a role in that feedback process, and whether that be allowing students to share their work and get some feedback from AI to perfect it in the end, or whether it be the work is still submitted to an academic who then has some AI assistance to help speed up their feedback provision process. And I think that doing this is going to allow us to get back to that mentoring type relationship between the teacher and the student, where the student is asking the teacher for some guidance, and they're getting that guidance that they need because we have technology to assist us in doing that in a more scalable way. Because too often these days we're just finding that a lot of that relationship building and the mentoring stuff gets lost because there's so much else to do, and just not enough time for feedback and conversations and drawing upon that expertise from those academics.
I think that really pulls together two really important points. The one that you ended with there, which is the amount of time that academics have, and increasing that contact time with students, the bit that they are the absolute professionals at. I think the other part is, with AI, this isn't necessarily a debate about whether you use AI for absolutely everything or AI for absolutely nothing. There's got to be shades in between. I came to Australia last year as part of I grandly title it a world tour. I went to various locations around the world and asked questions about AI use by educators. And it's clear that from the results we've got, that there are very few educators who are saying AI everything, please, if any. But there are people saying, yeah, there are portions here where it could help. I mean, finessing my feedback, giving me suggestions which I don't have to follow, and perhaps the extent to which we look at how this matches some of our current practice. So using a comment bank, for example, when you do feedback, that's pre-written. You don't have to use all of it. You can use bits of it. AI has a potential role there. But as an ever-evolving conversation, this is one where people are going to have to find their right point. I mean, we think it's super important that if we provide AI tools, people have the flexibility to switch them off, use them where they're appropriate. And I think that's part of the discussion of where we take it. I've got a couple of questions for you about Inspira and using that at UQ. And as you said, you've been heavily involved in that, as I know. What lessons have you learned from integrating Inspira into your work, and what advice would you give to others who are either starting off or really in the infancy of their journey in doing so? And UQ have used Inspira now for a number of years, and you've got some really impressive use of it.
Yeah, so one of the main things that I've learned during that process is that small incremental changes can make a big difference. So if your assessment, I mentioned this earlier, if your assessment contains questions with a definitive answer, there are several question types in Inspira that can deal with those questions in an interesting way while still allowing them to be automatically marked. And that small change can make a big difference to your marking load. Also, if you break questions down into chunks like scaffolding, something that's very easy to do in Inspira, then that's going to make it easier for students to understand what's being asked of them and provide a richer response. And that's going to cut down the number of inquiries you might get from students about clarifying what the question is actually asking. So you don't have to change everything at once. You can just dip your toe in the water, try some small changes this semester, make some more changes next semester. And the beauty of Inspira is that it makes it very easy to duplicate questions. So you can experiment and adapt those questions and create variations of those questions and trying something different with each iteration of the assessment. And this is kind of the work that I've been trying to help people do over the years as well when they are just starting out with Inspira, getting them to have a go, getting them to experiment, showing them all the possibilities, all the different question types, and then I will build little examples for them in their own context so they can see how this applies to their assessment, and then they can use those, they can adapt them. It's just very flexible for that purpose, and I think that doing things like that is really a great way of getting people just to take that first step.
And an aligned question to it, can you share an example or a couple of examples if you have them of where Inspira has transformed your assessment or your assessment processes at UQ?
Yeah, there's been a few, some fairly large transformations that we've seen here at UQ. So up until a few years ago, on-campus exams were still mostly conducted on paper, and some of those were completely manually marked. Some of them used bubble sheets that were processed by a machine if the exam contains multiple choice questions, but ultimately that bubble sheet machine was retired and we embraced digital on-campus exams using Inspira. And a part of that, we were able to introduce people to those different question types. So those exams that might have been done on a bubble sheet, which were multiple choice, you can actually see this whole range of other question types that's going to allow you to ask questions in different ways and assess different skills while using them. So the whole examination process was transformed during this time. So the university moved to a bring your own device arrangement. Students would bring their laptops to the exam venues with Safe Exam Browser installed on those laptops. And then we trained tech support people to be present in those exam venues to assist with such exams. And we introduced an integration between our exam manager system, like an exam request system, where people would fill in the details when they want to have an exam, an on-campus exam. And that information would automatically set up test shells in Inspira that all that the academic would need to do then is just attach the question set when they're ready. But it's not all been about exams though. That was a large piece of the transformation work. But just the variety of question types available in Inspira, as well as the different layout options and just generally ways of making it easier to set up and more appealing to students, has meant that it's opened up opportunities for Inspira to be used for a whole range of assessment types, like scaffold assignments or field reports or tutorial activities, and even speaking and listening tasks with the audio record and the listening options that you have available in there, and the ability to embed resources like YouTube videos or SoundCloud clips and things like that. So we're using Inspira in meaningful ways for learning as well, not just in high-stakes summative assessment. And a lot of that has come just from people trying and dipping their toe in the water, like I said earlier, just seeing what question types it has, how they might be useful for their assessment. And once they've tried it, they generally like using it, students like using it, and it just grows from there.
That sounds great. Well, that is all for our discussion today. Dale, thank you very much for joining us and for telling us about the great work at UQ and your views on where assessment is going. It's always interesting to hear how people are using digital tools generally and Inspira in particular. So thank you again for coming on. And thank you to our listeners. If you found this useful, please like, subscribe and share via your preferred podcast platform. And if you've got a moment, a quick review is always appreciated. Dale, any final thoughts that you wanted to convey before we close out the podcast?
Yes, we are in a challenging and ever-changing time and uncertain time as well when it comes to higher education. And I think for anyone listening out there who is perhaps an academic in an institution, please, if you don't know already whether you have a learning designer at your institution, or perhaps you do have one but you haven't accessed them before, please reach out to your learning designer, because they can help you try to navigate this space.
Indeed, everyone needs a good pilot, and that is something I heartily endorse. Well, Del, as I mentioned, it's been fascinating to chat. I always enjoy speaking to people across the academic community. I was out in Australia last year. This year I'm going to be in Lancaster in the UK, in Hong Kong, in Spokane in Washington State in the summer, and a couple of other places. So always happy to chat if you're at one of the events I'm at, or if not, pretty easy to find online. Happy to talk to people about these questions or indeed any others. So thank you very much for being on the podcast. Assessment in Focus is brought to you by Inspira, providing flexible assessment with integrity. I've been Ishan Kolhatkar, and I will see you next time.